This video is about fireground control. It's basically going to take you from the beginning of the fireground experience, actually before the beginning, from pre-fire training and size-up considerations, all the way through to decentralization of your fireground reports, and post-control operations. It's designed to allow chief officers and departments to sort of understand, what the most important expectations are to set with your people, so that on the game day, you have a lot of things in place that are going to allow you to be more successful and run a more safe and organized fireground. Welcome to the class. I'd like to thank the Tulsa Fire Department for having me here, and the Penwell Corporation for doing the videos here. Today we're going to talk about command and control of the fireground. We'll incorporate some safety into that, but command and control is the bottom line of running your fireground and keeping it safe. That having been said, part of that is based on setting expectations way before the fire on how we're going to conduct ourselves on the fireground. So we'll be talking about some of those things as well, right? Control of the fire begins with control of the fireground, and control of the fireground begins with setting expectations, right? The expectations that are set here, as we discussed earlier, are the standard operating procedures that you guys use, your policies that you have on gear, policies that you have with your accountability. We talked about driver policies as well, right? You got to get there, right? So this setting expectations, as long as those expectations are followed and enforced, your fireground generally runs, a lot smoother than if they're not. However, we have to stay on top of those things, because the minute we don't stay on top of it, the fireground starts to fall apart. And we have to make sure we address that every possible time we can, right? So the expectations that I'm going to talk about a little bit here, and just briefly, the first, the scene assignment SOP. The first engine's doing what the first engine's supposed to do, the first ladder doing what they're doing. This sort of sets the fireground. It's the game plan that you have on your fireground. And if everybody is doing what they're expected to do, a lot of the holes sort of stay filled. If the first due engine gets the first line in place and the second due engine doesn't get them a water supply or doesn't stretch the backup line, well, now we have a hole in the fireground, and we have to address that, which sort of delays everything else. Same with the ladder company doing ventilation and doing search. PPE policies should always be on, and we'll talk a little more about that. We're going to talk in this class about communication guidelines. Where I work, we have relatively stringent communication guidelines, and we're going to talk about our scene reporting and our division progress reports, because as an incident commander, these are things that I'm expecting to hear. And actually, when we don't hear them, we generally have to take that officer or acting officer to task on why he didn't give those reports, all right? And a lot of that is the first due report. Operational safety and company integrity go hand in hand. If your company integrity is on par and it's good, our freelancing generally sort of is diminished, but the operational safety really should guide your whole operation. Get them in safe, work them safe, get them out safe. We don't do anything if it's unsafe, and it should be what guides your tactics and your strategies. We're going to talk about command decentralization, breaking your fireground down. And for me, that was the sort of what clicked in my head on how to properly run a fireground, because there are times that you're going to run a fireground that you may have 100 people on, You guys use the alarm sequence, first alarm, second alarm, third alarm. How high do you guys go? What's the highest you've gone?
It's an all-call. We go first alarm draws 2 more engines, ladder, second alarm draws 2 more engines, a ladder, district chief, and so on. Then we get to a certain point, it's an all-call. An
all-call, all right. So you get this standard for what you get. Yeah, that's real important. Sometimes you hear departments dribbling companies in. Give me another engine, let me have a truck. 3 hours later, maybe I'd like a chief officer and a RIC team. So you want to have a standard sort of response, because again, if the game plan is set properly, everyone knows what to expect, and it just makes it easier for everybody to operate, And then lastly is disciplined operations. When your operations are disciplined and they're based on discipline, based on the expectations set for the department, generally things run a lot smoother, and it's a more well-run fireground and a better fire department, right? So we'll talk about the steps of fireground control. We're going to go right from the beginning to the end. We're going to start with pre-fire planning, and I'm just going to talk briefly about that and scene size-up. We're going to talk about a preliminary size-up report, which is that first report that's going to come from that first company on scene. We'll talk about how to determine your strategy, what some of the things are that you're going to be should be thinking about. The initial progress report, which sort of goes after you begin operating. Again, we'll talk decentralization, which comes as the fireground starts to age and we start to sort of get more complex and address different issues. Feedback, evaluation, adjustment. The only way I can figure out if we're doing good here is if I get information from the people working out on the fireground. Other than that, I have no information. And part of that is the decentralization thing. More progress reports, which go on. Do you guys do progress reports every so often?
That commander will usually ask for them.
Okay.
That's what you ask for information, progress report.
Are you prompted by dispatch for them?
No,
Okay.
that's what, on the fireground themselves, I mean, if we're not getting the feedback we're wanting from whoever's in charge of fire attack or ventilation or whatever,
Okay.
we'll ask for a progress report.
Okay.
Now, as far as safety, we have, we have PAR.
Okay.
So we can, every 20 minutes in a working fire, every 20 minutes, we go through a PAR process to make sure
Okay.
everyone's accounted for.
Now your PAR is a full roll call or PAR of the divisions?
It's a PAR of, depending on how we're set up.
Okay.
If, usually we work, we don't have the large fires like we're talking about here as a whole. So we're able to, the incident commander is able to keep control pretty much of just your five operations.
Fire attack, ventilation, that sort of thing.
We can hit PAR by company.
Okay, okay. So you guys use the group situation a little more than the division situation. Okay,
True.
okay.
That's kind of how we.
Yeah, it's basically the same. Listen, you know what the thing is? If everybody's on the same page and it works for you, then that's the best thing that you got, you know? So if you're using, attack group and all that sort of thing. But sometimes we'll do a PAR, and I'll do a PAR of the divisions. Like Delta Division, let me have a PAR of your companies, and they'll say, I have Engine 5, Squad 7, and Ladder 3. All right, and we can fix our command board.
The last large fire we had on A platoon, where we had the backdraft and the injuries, we had divisions and stuff. And
Okay.
And the incident commander was using what you're talking about.
Okay. As compared, and then we'll also do roll calls, which will be individual companies. We'll call the roll calls. But, we'll talk about that as we go along. And then finally, we're going to talk about post-control operations, which, if you ever hear the statement that the first impression is always the one people remember, it doesn't work that way with the fire department. Usually with us, it's the last impression, because it's how we leave them. And we're going to talk about that during post-control operations and what happens there. Pre-fire planning is that aspect of the fireground where you do your homework, and your success on a fireground has a lot to do with the homework you've done before. Whether you know about the building or not, it really has to do with the size up before the fire. So you can actually take the 13 points of size up and apply them to any building, and from that information you can have some great intelligence on how to actually fight a fire and how to survive the experience. Not only from the firefighting point of view, but even from the litigious point of view, where you may have overlooked something because you didn't pre-plan it well, and it created a situation that may have put your department in a weird place. So you don't want to do that. Take a look at the places you might be fighting fires and plan accordingly. So pre-fire planning and the 13-point size up. This came from my book. It's in Norman's book. Turpac has something similar, and they probably got it from somewhere else. There's no new information in the fire service, really. But if you look at those 13 points here, which one's the most important, would you say? Construction, okay. What else? Life hazard, okay. Does it vary?
Yes.
Yeah, it does, right? It definitely varies. It's almost like what's the most important piece of equipment you have on a fireground. It always varies. If you're on a hill and you forget to chock the rig, and it starts rolling down a block, or you're inside the room and they don't chock the door and the door closes on a hose line, well, that 35-cent chock was the most important piece of equipment you had, right? So it sort of does vary. There are a couple, though, that are always important here, construction being one of them. Actually, there's one that actually sets the stage for all the others. And you really can't do anything until you know this. What is it? Anybody know? No? Location and extent, right? Until we can find the fire, what can we do? We can only look for it. We don't know where to stretch our lines, do our searches. You ever pull up on a building that all you see is smoke? You don't even know a building's on fire? You know, what do we got to do? We got to find it first, right? How much of this can you know before the fire? Percentage, would you say? A lot? Is it more than 50? Yeah, absolutely. It's probably about 85, right? Even things like location and extent, we don't know it, but in certain buildings we pre-plan, like, hey, if we have a fire in the emergency room as compared to a fire in the operating room, as compared to a fire in a parking lot, you know, there's differences, you know, and again, it comes down to location and extent, right? But yeah, we can know a lot about this. So our homework is really important, you know. We're going to talk about a couple of things that we did with the structure fire risk analysis and building characteristics. For me, if you're not a student of building construction in this business, you don't even belong in this business, because we fight fires in buildings. So we have to know everything about them, you know, construction type and size, you know, the 5 types of construction. Based on how the building's built, we know how it falls apart. We know how fire is going to spread. We know where people are going to be in danger. We know how to ventilate, all those things. Structural condition, how good are all our buildings? Are all buildings perfectly, you know, set up, or yeah, we have some messes, right? That's just the way it goes, right? Occupancy and contents. That's an important piece of the puzzle too. What's the building used for? Sometimes the contents in a building are more expensive and more important than the building itself, and actually create more of a danger for us than the building itself, right? Look at this building here. Now, if you look over to this here, that's actually a vehicle there. So look how big this building is. Now, what's the most important piece of equipment you bring in here as you go in? Thermal imaging. What else, though? The lifeline, right? The lifeline. This building here, if you're in this building without a lifeline and that smoke condition gets bad, you ain't getting out. You ain't getting, that's a New Jersey term for are not getting out. You're not getting out. The things you see below, this is the building marking system we use in New Jersey. It was put in place after the 5 firefighters were killed in Hackensack. But the triangle, R is a roof, F is a floor, and the 2 is roof and floor. It's for trusses. So we know at a glance whether we have a truss roof. This building here is a Class 2 construction. So we'll know that there are some issues in this building, not only from the construction, but also from the fact that, you know, we're going to get lost in here if we're not careful, right? We got these going up now, these big, monstrous, lightweight wood frame buildings that years ago were ordinary construction. Now they're lightweight wood frame. The floors are either trusses or laminated I-beams, and they just go on like forever. Luckily, they're sprinklered, but what don't they sprinkler? The voids, right? They don't sprinkler the voids, which is really where our biggest problems are. Fire gets in there, all right? This was a lamb beam. This is a fire we had in North Hudson, around the block from one of the firehouses. They had a very, very quick response here. It was under construction, and they knocked it down from the doorway, which is the most important thing to do. Knock these lightweight fires down from a protected area. Don't go piling into the area, because you're going to wind up falling through the floor. And this was about a 2-minute response and a very quick knockdown. And look at all that burned here. You have 1, 2, you actually have 3 burned through laminated I-beams that were burned from the floor below. All right, so this stuff fails very quickly, and when it's got stuff on top of it, which this building didn't, it fails even quicker. All right? Now this particular picture here is a picture, and it's kind of hard to see for you guys, but it's a picture of a splintered bowstring truss. And we found this in an abandoned building that we had, and the roof was sagging, and we went inside and looked, and the building had a splintered bowstring truss right next to the garage door. So if we had responded to it, they would have opened the garage door, knocked the T-shore out that was holding up that truss, and collapsed the roof. So we sent out a safety memo on this and ensured everybody knew about it. Luckily for us, this building is torn down now, right? How about this? What's this stuff here? Okay, what's this doing? What are they doing? They're holding a wall together. Now, you might see them in a sort of consistent manner, which means they might have been built into the building. That's not always the case. In this case here, this is an old building by us. They're arbitrary. When you see them arbitrary, that means that that's not a good wall. And we don't even know what they're tied into on the other side. They could be tied into, like, you know, nothing. Who knows? But you see something like that, this is something that you have to be thinking about, and again, address in your reports. All right? How about this? These big area buildings, you guys got these big box stores, right? Now, with these big box stores, it's very possible there could be a big fire in there, and we don't even know about it till we actually get in there. You know, this rack storage. Not only is it unprotected steel, but look how those toilets are. Nice angle, just waiting for you to come there, right? Now, how do we work fires like this? What are some of the things we definitely need to bring into these buildings? definitely lifelines, right? But if you were dealing with these rack storage things, right? And this is where we're hoping that our first two companies are making the proper choice, because these things are real dangerous. You almost want to set up like an interior collapse zone in a building like this, sort of flank these things, because if that fire starts to like beat these things up and they start coming down, we have some major problems here. If you don't have a proper collapse zone here set up on the interior of this building, you could really get you guys hurt. You know, so it's almost like the first new officers seeing this stuff, lightweight construction, large area buildings, man traps, and areas where disorientation is probable. We got to take some real solid steps to make sure we get that information out to command and we control our people on the inside. How about this? Look at the window up there, right? You guys got buildings with stuff just piled in them? Sometimes they're people's buildings, right? The Collier's mansions and the hoarders, you know. Again, we see these things, get that information out to command, right? How about that? Anybody know what that is? Nope, it's melted. Nope. We had a fire in a medical imaging place. And it was an arson fire started in the closet by one of the employees. And what happened was in the closet was where they kept all the sharps containers. And the sharps containers all melted and we had needles all over the floor. So we talk about occupancy, right? What's my occupancy? Some place where you might have some sort of bloodborne pathogen going. Although, where do you see sharps containers now? Everywhere. You see them in hotels, you see them in bars, you see them all over, not that I hang out in bars, but you see them all over the place. And, you know, this is a danger. You know, one needle stick is you know, could ruin your career, ruin your family. So, you know, again, thinking about what we're fighting fires in, what our occupancy is, may cue us into a couple of the precautions that we have to take. All right, scene size up should be done by everyone on the fire ground, from the first arriving officer and his firefighters to the eventual incident commander and any incident commanders who come later on as a result of a change in command or a change in an operational period. Scene size up occurs all the time, and remember, you can't do a scene size up from just the front of the building. It has to be done from all sides of the building, from all areas of the building, from every nook and cranny of the building. And as an incident commander, I can't always do that myself. So this video is also going to focus on how to get that information from the areas in and around the building. And again, we're going to go right back to expectations, that if you set these expectations below the fire about what you need, you're more likely to get that information the day of the fire. All right? Once we do our fire risk structural analysis, we have our fire risk analysis, right? And what are we thinking about here? The fire factors. Where is it and how big is it? How long has it been burning? Why is that important? Collapse, right? Collapse issues, right? What are the smoke conditions telling us, right? Reading smoke. A lot of times the smoke read from the outside is going to be much more accurate than the smoke read from the inside, you know, especially as the incident ages. And also, how far can the fire spread? You know, where are my exposures? How far can this thing go? And that's going to determine also, you know, how many people do I need to actually put this thing out, right? And then what weird stuff is present? We ever get weird stuff on a fire ground? Right? There's always weird stuff on a fire ground. Why do they call us? Because things are weird, right? But you look at this particular video here, you know, talk about how far can the fire go. All right? You're going to see here, you know, got this thing going here. Look at the roofs. The roofs all the way down a block are pushing heavy smoke here. So you know right away that we probably have an open cockloft, all right? And we know, and here's the fire building all the way back here, which is probably about 7 buildings away from all of that cockloft exposure that we just saw. You know, so seeing something like that has got to cue you in to the need for a lot of different, a lot of personnel and a lot of chief officers to bring onto your fire ground, right? Again, looking at the smoke, looking at the nastiness and the angriness of the smoke. Just this one picture can show you the angriness of the smoke, but you want to be able to look at that and again, know where and where you cannot put your people. That nobody's going to survive these particular types of fires, right? We can work in other areas, or if we're going to go in there, we can make sure we have a hose line, but nobody belongs in there because nobody's going to survive that, right? It's just very heavy smoke pushing down under a lot of pressure. There's a lot of heat behind it. That was a fire, actually. If you look at those power lines, we were coming down a block. It was like Christmas. All the power lines were burning across the street. It started in an electrical sort of service between the two buildings, and it burned into the two buildings and across the street on the power lines. So it was an interesting fire, right? This was another one we had in, this was an 8-alarm fire that we had, and the fire burned about 5 or 6 buildings down on Bergen Line Avenue in Union City. And you know, you got to know, where are we going to stop this thing? Where can we make our stop? That sometimes you might have to give up a building or two in order to make a good stop, and that's very difficult to explain to who? Yeah, people that live there, right? And sometimes the mayor. But sometimes you have to do those type of things. And this fire was actually stopped in that exposure right there on the right. I was actually the division commander there. I got called in, and that was like exposure D3. And it was a windy night, and it was one of those nights where things weren't going right for us, you know? And you know, just don't get nobody killed. That's the key. Don't get nobody killed. Then you get the weird stuff. This was a fire we had in a place that they slaughter animals. Like people buy a chicken or a turkey or a goat, and they slaughter it and they take them home. This is on Bergen Line Avenue in West New York. It's the most densely populated street in the most densely populated city in the most densely populated county in the whole country. In the middle of rush hour, there were goats, ducks, chickens running all over the avenue, running out of this building, right? So, you know, and again, firefighters, and you know, what were people thinking about? When this was on the news and it got a lot of airplay, what were people thinking about? What was the most important thing? The poor animals, right? That was the most important thing. So we were burning a lot of companies. They made these makeshift pens and were just dumping the animals in. People were carrying animals down the block. It was crazy. But this fire presented some challenges for us because it started in the cockloft. It started in a feather evacuation unit where they take the chickens, they put them through, and it pulls the feathers off them. But they were cleaning it with a flammable solvent, and all the feathers up in the cockloft started burning. So we're working this particular fire, and there are exposures all over the place. And we couldn't, normally what we'll do is we'll open the roof and we'll pull the ceilings. We couldn't pull the ceilings. We were saying, what are these ceilings? Are they double sheetrock? Are they concrete? Couldn't figure it out. Turned out it was Formica over plywood. Why did they use Formica? To clean up. It's much easier to clean up. So we had to actually get chainsaws in. And this was based on reports that I got from my officers. And, you know, we can do this. We had a little bit of a firewall, so they were able to work from a safe area. The other thing was, what was in all the water and the runoff water? All the animal biohazard stuff. So we actually had to set up a decon that day as well for guys to come out of the building and decon themselves with all the droppings all over them. So it was a really interesting fire. And the thing about this fire, what was weird, it created the need for a lot of adjustment in our tactics, you know, which is what you need to do. And some of the only ways I was able to do those adjustments were from the reports I was getting from my chief officers and from my safety officer and the guys up on the roof. So it was an interesting fire. And we were first due here. This was the Sully miracle, the plane down in the Hudson River. Our fire, what we did here was we commandeered the ferries, sent a full response down to the waterfront. They jumped on the ferries and went out. Now, this wasn't necessarily that big of an incident. It was an incident of setting up a division out there, getting the people in, accounting for them. But what was everybody thinking? No, what was the world thinking when they saw this? Terrorism. So, of course, we had every Tom, Dick, and Harry with badges hanging around their neck thinking they were in charge and, you know, kind of screwing up the whole command system when, you know, really we didn't know who these people were to begin with, and we were just running our end of it. But this was really nothing more than accounting for the people, getting them in, getting them into a shelter, making sure everyone was identified. Luckily, the plane stayed afloat. Had the planes not stayed afloat, we would have had a much bigger issue on our hands, and it was very cold. But you know, again, adjustment of your operation, and it was based on reports that we were getting. It was based on, you know, the needs of the companies, and you just adjusted, called more resources in and worked that way, set up divisions, set up ways for the people to get out and be accounted for, and it worked out okay. You know, we had a unified command with New York City and with the Coast Guard, and it you know, turned out a lot better than anybody thought it would, right? PPE. This is something I always talk about in my classes. No matter what you're doing, no matter what the class is about, if your personnel are not wearing PPE properly, you're eventually going to get yourself in trouble. So, you know, we're talking about things like waist straps, wearing the hoods, chin strap along underneath your chin, and wearing the proper gloves, right? Listen, if you're not doing this right, and this is what I say to my company officers, if you're not getting this part of the fireground right, what else am I not to trust you with? Because this is the most basic of everything. If your guys can't be geared up properly, how else can I trust you in anything else, you know? And these are the areas where, you know, we see people complacent, you know, and people think, you know, it's cool not to wear the gear. But you know what? It's not cool not to wear the gear. It's cool to be in gear. And I'm a big proponent of the chin strap and the waist straps, and